Right, welcome back to the Ben Bowman YouTube channel. I hope you guys are doing well. Spurs have just lost 1-0 to Chelsea, so it feels like a good time to put out a video that I recorded the other day with Kish from Lilywhite Lab and Seb On Football, where we discussed Spurs' potential new manager options going into next season. Tonight was absolutely grim, and I think Ange has definitely come to the end now. Whether he will get sacked before the Frankfurt game next week or our game against Southampton on Sunday, who knows, but it feels like it's definitely come to the end. It feels like he's lost all relationship with the fans after the way that he's acted tonight, and also obviously the poor performances on the pitch as well. So in this video, again, another longer video, another kind of more podcast style format, we did a tier list ranking all of the managers that Spurs have been linked with and some other outside shouts as well. It's a really good conversation, so I hope you guys enjoy it. Just obviously bear in mind that we recorded this before the Chelsea game, and yeah, hope you enjoy it. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, get involved in the comments as well, and let me know who you want as the next Spurs manager. There's going to be more content coming over the next few days. I'm unsure yet whether I'm actually going to do a Chelsea breakdown. I'm not sure we need that, but there's going to be more content coming. So keep an eye on the channel, make sure to subscribe, and hope you enjoy the video. Peace. Right, I'm joined again by Seb On Football and Kish from Lilywhite Lab as we're going to go through Tottenham's potential manager options for next season. It feels increasingly likely that Ange Postecoglou is not going to be in the job, so we're going to go through and assess all of the potential options that Spurs have been linked with. This isn't the first video that us three have done. We did a video earlier this week where we did a keep or sell for the current Tottenham squad looking ahead to next season, and we're going to be looking ahead to next season again now by going through and assessing these managers. Before we kind of get into that, Kish, I wanted to get your thoughts on where you're at with Ange right now. Obviously, we're recording this on Tuesday, a couple of days before the Chelsea game. He's done an interview with Opta Sport, and I feel like some of the quotes that have maybe come out of that hasn't done Ange any favours in terms of keeping people on side. He's spoken about the fact that he feels like a lot of Tottenham fans have lost faith in him now. He's spoken about the fact that he ultimately wasn't really prepared for this season. I don't know whether he's talking about himself as a coach or whether he's talking about the club generally. I think you can't really necessarily argue with the club side of things in terms of maybe the summer and certainly the lack of work that we did in January. But what do you kind of make of that, and where are you at right now with Ange looking ahead to next season?
Yeah, I think I was one of Ange's biggest supporters. I think I was grateful to first of all have someone at the helm who spoke well, spoke
Yeah.
like really wanted to achieve stuff with this club. Um, and I really liked the way he, especially at first, managed those press conferences, and he sort of did get a buy-in from me,
Mm.
and I'm sure lots of other people. Um, I think along the way, there's been kind of a few errors, and obviously, as a football fan, you try and stay kind of faithful and hopeful, and to a point where those errors then pile up to a point where you're just like, I don't think this is going to work. And everyone has their different kind of breaking point. And I think a lot of people wanted him out before me and whatever. But I think definitely at a point now where I just don't think he's the right person for the job. I think he's made too many errors in terms of tactically, personnel wise, lack of rotation wise. I also think some of his quotes haven't been helpful. I think some of his actions have sort of poured petrol on the fire where you kind of want to galvanize a fan base and a squad, especially in the lower moments. And I think he's done the opposite. Um, and so I think his time is ticking, and I wish him all the best. I really enjoy the way he looks at football and the way he wants to play.
Yeah.
And the type of footballers he likes, it seems like, although I also have some kind of concerns around who he's recruited as well. Not that that's only him, but obviously he's got a part to play in that.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think for me it's time to kind of move on from him in the summer.
Yeah. Seb?
Yeah, I echo all of that. To be honest, I think, like, I mean, Ben, we were both very behind Ange Postecoglou at the start of the season for the majority of this season, but it has now reached a point where we're 13th in the league table. It's not looking like it's going to get any better. The mistakes are repetitive at this point. It's really, really frustrating. And I can't really see it improving too drastically. And I think it's a massive, massive risk to give him potentially another summer and another season with a squad that I think has a lot of talent, a lot of young talent. Like Kish said, I think he's misprofiled a lot of players this season. I feel like with Ange, we've always known that he has a very low floor and a very high ceiling, and I think we're right on the floor right now, and I don't really see us improving or massively lifting that. I think the faith has gone. I think when you lose the faith from the fan base, I just think it's an extremely steep climb upwards to get that back, and I don't think it's going to happen. No, I am definitely at breaking point with Ange Postecoglou, both on and off the pitch, like Kish said, 100%.
Yeah, he kind of admitted that today as well. That was one of the worrying things to me when he kind of come out. Bearing in mind, like, we've had an international break where we've, thank God, we've kind of been away from Tottenham for nearly 3 weeks. But his first interview that he's done, and come back, he did an interview with Opta Sports with Mark Schwarzer, where he was kind of like, it was very defeatist, and it was very like, it wasn't the get look. And don't get me wrong, he's the people that have Ange out aren't, you're not going to claw them back over the line now anyway. But it was very much like, yeah, well, I know a lot of Tottenham fans have lost faith in me, but we just got to try and win the Europa League and make something of the season. It was a little bit, it wasn't exactly the rallying cry, which, to be fair, like, I think, and maybe I've been guilty of it a little bit with Ange, of kind of being sucked back in at points, but like the amount of press conference he has done where it's like, just when you're out, you pull me back in. Like, I remember after the AZ Alkmaar second leg where he said some brilliant things, like, talked about the season as a whole and kind of gave you some insight and detail that maybe was a bit missing in terms of why things have been going wrong and what we want to do now and how we want to kind of correct that going forward. And he does have that knack of just being able to pull you back, but I think it's probably way too far gone for some people, and I'm there as well. Like, I think I've probably been a bit naive with it myself with Ange, and I spoke about this in videos, but like Kish said, I think when you've got a manager that really wants to try and win in a certain way, it makes him a very attractive prospect. Like, and like Seb said as well, like, I think our ceiling has got higher this season, but our floor has also got lower. And I think maybe there has kind of been some damage done to this squad, which is going to be quite hard for another manager to kind of come and pick up. But we're going to assess the options in this video. Obviously, this isn't every single manager in the world here. I haven't actually got any managers here who I don't think. Well, Xavi's out of a job. I think all the other managers are currently employed.
Terzic.
Edin Terzic, yeah. He obviously left Dortmund last year. So there's no like Ten Hag or anything like that, or Gareth Southgate in here. I know Southgate has kind of been linked with the job more so from fans.
If we've got Gareth Southgate, we are finished as a football club.
Could you imagine? I think it's also more from like fans thinking it's such a Levy thing to do rather than there ever being any substance behind it.
So would be.
But so we're going to go with the options that have actually kind of been linked. We'll start off. I think the best place to start is probably with Andoni Iraola, who is seen as the favourite for the job. Talk of a release clause of 11 million pounds. The Athletic did a big article last week where they were basically saying that Tottenham have kind of had discussions, they've approached his camp, he's very much seen as the number one candidate, and other than that, it's also Thomas Frank and Marco Silva, who we'll come on to. We've got 5 categories here, as you've been able to see. We've got Dream Manager, Solid appointment, Big Risk, Doesn't Move Me, I'm not excited by them, or just Avoid. Kish, I'm going to kind of let you go on Iraola at first, because I know I've seen some tweets from you and from Lilywhite Lab in general that you are quite sceptical about the potential appointment of Iraola. Firstly, what do you think some of his strengths are as a manager and what he could bring to Tottenham, but also what are your big red flags that you see in him?
I think one thing I've realised at the top level is that every coach is a good coach. Like, to get to this top level, every coach has their strengths and every coach has their weaknesses, and that's kind of prerequisite to the elite level, and the margins are so small. I think with Iraola and lots of other managers, I mean, football clubs often fall into, sometimes it's planned, but fall into managers that just suit the squad perfectly and it just clicks. I think like there's been examples of that countless times. I mean, Pochettino, wasn't the first choice and seemed to kind of come to Spurs and find this really young and hungry and fit squad that suited his kind of pressing system so well. And I think Iraola, combined with Bournemouth's recent recruitment, has kind of meant that they've had an amazing season. They're amazing out of possession. I mean, they're relentless pressing. They're kind of not only intense and aggressive and fit in their pressing, but also the pressing is very measured and kind of thought out. It's planned. It's not like at times our pressing's been. Although I think in the early days of Ange, our press was good, but I think
and the early days of this season as well. I think when Solanke came in, he was such a improvement on what we saw towards the tail end of last season, where I think things in terms of our out of possession structure just kind of went to the wall, really.
I think what Iraola kind of thrives on with this Bournemouth squad is chaos ball, basically, and it's quite similar to early Liverpool on a lesser extent, but under Klopp, sorry. But it's like if this game becomes transitional and we're going end to end, we're gonna outdo you, we're gonna outwork you. We've got better athletes than you. We'll catch you out trying to play out because our press is so good. But that when they're successful, it is that kind of game which can be end to end. But they just back themselves, I feel like, to come out on top of that, and they are pretty successful at that. I think there's been no evidence that once teams sit off them, that he has a plan which is more measured and controlled and that can kind of break down teams when there's no space to exploit. They're in that kind of sweet spot where teams haven't really had the summer to fully kind of analyze every team, and most teams will go and try and have a go at Bournemouth. Whereas the better you get, the more that teams are going to sit off you, and then it's like down to you to kind of think about patterns of play and how can we manipulate this block, and do we have the quality individually to break that block. And I think there's been no evidence of Iraola that he can do that, and maybe he would tweak his system, and maybe he would learn those things. But for me, he's too, at the moment in his current form, reliant on transitions, physicality, and that system for me is capped, especially at a big club where most teams are going to come and sit in a low block against you. So that's why I'm not totally writing him off, but I think there needs to be a lot more evidence that he's the right man for the job, and I think some of these candidates have more evidence. And as a personality, I mean, he's not on a void or a kind of massive personality I love. I think he speaks decently well, but he's not someone who I'm drawn towards massively as a personality wise. So I'm kind of middle of the road with him. Some people are really high on him and some people are really down on him. I don't think it's either of those. I think he's a good manager, but I don't think he's what we need right now, personally.
Yeah, I'd agree with that in terms of being like there is a real kind of, there's two ends of the spectrum with Iraola, I think, amongst the Spurs fan base. Some people are really, really super hot on him, and then I think a lot of people are kind of writing him off. And I do think that part of the reason is why people are so hot on him. I think he's got that shiny new toy syndrome a little bit, where he's a foreign manager that's come to the Premier League that has kind of been able to definitely impose his style 100%. I know obviously Bournemouth struggled towards the beginning of the last season when he first came in. I think he basically had a couple of games to kind of save his job and managed to do that. And ever since then, they've been really impressive. Obviously, over the course of the last 6 games, I think they've gone winless. And actually, that game against Man City at the weekend, I thought, was the poorest out of the lot in terms of the last 6 games, and the poorest I've definitely seen them in a while. They really struggled. Maybe it's that kind of the focus on physicality that is catching up with them a little bit. And I think that is a red flag to some Spurs fans in terms of the the hell we've kind of gone through this season with the injuries, etc. And like Bournemouth have had a similar thing, and obviously they've not been playing European football. So if he was to make that step up to a bigger club that could potentially be playing European football next year in Tottenham, although I think if we won the Europa League, Ange would still be the manager. But if we are looking to move on regardless, how he would be able to manage that squad, I think he'd need a really deep pool of players to be able to pick from. I think that's a bit of a red flag for me as well. And I think maybe this kind of season's taken its toll a little bit. But I do think there's things that I like about his game, but I do think he's a good coach, but I think he's been overhyped and slightly overrated because he's doing it at Bournemouth, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. It's a difficult situation for him to be in. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. Like, he deserves all of the credit that he's got.
2 things can be true at once, can't they?
Yeah, but I also think people have gone a little bit too far because he's a new manager and he's doing it and it's exciting, and it is. But there's also major red flags, I think, in that system. Seb, have you got kind of?
Yeah, 100%. We discussed it on the podcast yesterday, where I get a bit frustrated sometimes because I haven't made up my mind on Iraola, like, really at all. Like, I know what I like about him, and I think the way that he sort of profiles some of the players and improved players like a Ryan Christie, how he sort of adapted his role and changed that. I think that's super impressive to be able to do as a manager. And I feel like he's got a lot of that profiling right in his Bournemouth squad, which is something I think I've had a big problem with Ange Postecoglou in regards to that. But then like Kish said, there's something with Iraola that we haven't seen yet, that we're yet to see in terms of teams figuring them out, teams maybe taking Bournemouth a little bit more seriously as an entity, I think, and that could all happen next season. And I said to you yesterday, I don't get what the rush is to sort of, it feels like now managers will have one brilliant season, like I use Motta as an example, one great season at Bologna, all of a sudden he's snapped up and he's in that Juventus job, and it feels like the shiny new toy syndrome where there's a new manager on the scene and everyone has to be the first to get them and they're like the next biggest thing. And I just think I'd like to see managers, over a longer period of time. And Iraola, if he does a season at Bournemouth next season, and like Kish said, he'd have to adapt, he'd have to change. Teams would show Bournemouth a lot more respect, I think, in terms of, okay, we're not going to get sucked into playing your game. How does he then go and deal and adapt with that? And I think if Tottenham are sensible and know what they're doing, they'll wait on Iraola and they'll say, no, he's just not ready. Maybe in the future, maybe a couple of years down the line, maybe at the end of next summer if it's not worked out with whoever our new manager is. I know that's a dangerous mentality to have. Maybe if they...
And this is Tottenham.
Exactly.
this is Tottenham thinking about not gambling on someone like that.
100%. And if they feel like Iraola is the right man, then fair enough, go and get him. But like I said, I'd like to see more from Iraola and like to see him be truly tested in a way that would make him sort of a lot more attractive for the Tottenham job.
Yeah.
Sort of in agreement with Kish. But I think there's real upside.
I want to add to that as well. Like, I think, one caveat to say about football in general, I think the most important thing is recruitment and your squad and your players. And I think, obviously, there's different coaches and every coach has their strengths, every coach has their weaknesses. If you can profile the coach that is going to best optimize your team, that's the key. Brighton, for example, and I know everyone always uses Brighton's recruitment as an example, but their recruitment of coaches is just as good as their recruitment of players. And I think
100%.
Isolated, if we had brought in maybe Graham Potter, Roberto De Zerbi, Hurzeler, they may not have been a success at Tottenham relatively to what they're doing at Brighton, but it's the fact that it's done in such a measured, cohesive way where it's all kind of comes together at the right time. They're managers that suit the squad they have, managed at the right point of their career. I think often it's more about the fit than the actual ability of the coach. Often there are some unique cases. Pep, who else nowadays? Barring Pep, I don't know if there's that many managers that you just go and get, and you're like, whatever he does, just listen. It has to be the right fit, and it has to work with where you are as a club. Sorry, and I think that's one thing that we should note before we kind of analyze all the managers, because
I agree.
Because these are outright good coaches, all of them probably. But they're not all outright good fits, and I think that's the key.
Yeah, 100%.
I think one of the things that Bournemouth squad does really lack, that means that Iraola is even more wedded to the kind of system that he wants to play, is they do really lack quite a lot of creative passers. It's all very, like you said, very focused on transition. And
Alex Scott injury didn't help them there, did it?
Yeah, but even Alex Scott, I don't see him as a creator, really. I don't really see him like that. But
he's more of a deep line creator, isn't he?
Yeah, and he's good. He's still got good legs. He's got good output as well. But also, you think of their wingers; they're not necessarily creative. They're all about. Semenyo's very shot heavy, for example. Wants to shoot on sight every time he gets the ball. He's a brilliant ball carrier as well. And again, one thing that you could argue would be a smoother transition to Spurs for Iraola is the fact that these players are used to playing in a very intense pressing system. So that is one pro in terms of adaptation, but also I think there are certain players in that squad. I'm thinking of James Maddison, for example. What does James Maddison's role under Iraola look like if he's the Tottenham manager next season? Yeah. Does he really need him? Does he kind of opt for someone who is more of a second striker as that number 10, like he's kind of done with Kluivert? And it's worked for Kluivert, and I really like Justin Kluivert. But I do think there's certain important players that might actually, even Dejan Kulusevski, for example, I'm not sure how he works in an Iraola system when he's been one of our most important players. You find a role for him 100% because he's that good. But I do think Iraola will have to adapt quite a lot to make things work at Tottenham. And I think if he was given the job, I'd be excited about it because I think he's a good coach with a higher ceiling. But I do think there would be things that would have to change in his game. I think, like you said, Kish, that over-reliance on chaos, that lack of control at times. I think if they come up against a team like they did with City at the weekend, who are very good at just getting their foot on the ball and being able to dictate the game with passes like Gundogan, Kovacic, De Bruyne, often Bournemouth can't really get near them. Also, I think
second half was embarrassing. Like the way,
They were really
City's midfield is something that they've struggled with all season. Like teams playing through them. Bournemouth literally, like almost every time they got the ball back, were lumping it up front to Evan Nilsson, losing that aerial battle, and then just Man City were just winning the second ball so comfortably. It's like
That's the thing. They almost at times want to lose the ball so that they can go and press and win it back. And like,
yeah.
that's not
They're happy to take that risk.
Yeah,
they're happy to take that risk of playing off the striker and then picking up the second ball.
When they lost, they didn't have the intensity on Sunday. So it's like, do you completely almost lose the system if you said, teams are tired? Exactly.
I think that's the thing with Ange. I think when the intensity's gone, what is there left? Like that is such a big part of the system, and that's not what we need. And to be honest, I don't think at the top level that is really a viable way to play. No. In terms of top clubs, and you don't see the top clubs playing like that. There's so much more.
You're not winning a league playing like that, are you? You just don't have enough control.
You're far more likely to win a league playing. Again, this is my thing with Ange in terms of like too many things need to go all right at once for it to work. But you're far more likely to win a league with Ange's philosophy compared to Iraola's with that focus on possession. A lot of things have to work for it to go right. But I think Ange has maybe got a better idea of...
Even Ange is like... He hasn't tapped into that control...
No.
Atmosphere, attribute enough. And it's been like, you know, if you're that intense out of possession, at least be a bit slower in possession.
The only time where we've kind of seen it employed with Ange is like when we've... Yeah, the only time we've ever seen it with Ange is like when we have... When Ange ball has properly 100% clicked and we've been able to blow teams away very early. Like Man United, for example, at Old Trafford, we completely controlled that game from start to finish. Our out-of-possession game was arguably the best I think I've ever seen it. Again, this was a United side under Ten Hag right at the end. They were poor. But that's when we've been able to just slow the game down in the second half and just dictate the game at our pace. But again, they had a man sent off. Things kind of went in our favour for us to be able to do that. And like you said, I've not seen that enough. I just think the possession kind of based route under Ange, I think, is far more likely to maybe be successful than constantly relying on your out of possession game being 10 out of 10, which when you think about how physical led the Premier League has become in terms of recruitment, teams getting stronger, teams getting more physical, teams getting faster, that's not going to be sustainable when you're coming up against opponents who have got the squads to be able to match you in terms of running power and physicality as well. And I think it would, I'd be excited by it, but also there's a lot of red flags there for me.
I think I'd have Iraola in. I definitely wouldn't have him in a void or doesn't move me. Like I think that'd be a bit unfair.
Somewhere between, I think it's almost somewhere between these two.
I'd have him bottom of solid in my personal opinion. Like if we got in Iraola as a manager, I'd feel like. Again, I mean, if Tottenham get any manager in, I'm the sort of fan who will just back them and almost blindly follow them, at least for the first part. Like,
you
kind of got to be as a fan.
Yeah, I'd agree.
And I feel like, there's enough there with him for me to sort of go, okay, I'm going to park my worries for now. Obviously, we'll see what happens over the next few months and just get behind him a little bit, because there is something to get behind there, I think.
Yeah,
I just think just to add on the end, I just think it would be wild for Spurs to employ him after the physical season we've had.
So would you go more big risk?
Not necessarily. I just think the way that Spurs operate, which I also think is silly, is they think, oh, this doesn't work, let's just do that now, or we tried this, let's just try this, rather than having a process. And I think it's unlikely. I don't even know if they've like profiled him right or whatever. It just seems wild that we've had so many injury issues this season, as have Bournemouth, by the way, with one game a season, to go to another super intense system just seems a bit crazy to me.
I agree with that.
Maybe because we've seen our squad hasn't been big enough for this, and so why are we? Unless we're going to spend massive amounts in the summer, why would we kind of risk it again?
We already know isn't going to happen because
we can't spend that we can't spend what we don't have. Yeah, exactly. So,
I'd probably have him. I'd probably have him in between solid and big risk in sort of like there's definitely a risk there, but there's also something to get behind. I'd say. So
I agree. I think he lives somewhere in between those two. I think I'm happy to keep him at the bottom of solid because I think he's one of the better options. But I do have a lot of worries. Let's move on to. We'll come back to some of the other managers that are a bit more in the frame shortly. Let's talk about Xavi because I feel like
that would be so rogue.
Xavi's been out of work for a long time. He's not really been in this conversation. Barcelona, it actually felt like he probably did a better job on reflection than maybe he was given credit for at the end of his tenure at Barca, just because of the chaotic nature of everything that was going on there, which is still happening, by the way. But Hansi Flick has come. He did win the league. Like he did well, 100%. But it felt like it all kind of. I wouldn't say it went up in flames at the end, but it all felt a little bit like...
He fell out with Laporta massively, didn't he? And there was sort of this whole blow-up. I think Laporta's an incredibly difficult character to deal with.
Doesn't necessarily reflect on Xavi.
He seemed to flip-flop 3 or 4 times. They offered him a new contract, then they pulled the contract away. He said that they're definitely moving in a different direction. And then they had that meeting where they convinced Xavi to stay. And then 2 days later he was going again. And it was it was absolutely mental how they treated Xavi, in my opinion, especially being a club legend, and the fact that he'd done a good job for them. I think there were issues in the second part of last season in terms of playing the Barcelona way sort of thing. I do quotation marks, but that is a massively important thing at Barca. But I think as well, the young talent that he brought through, that can't be forgotten as well. The trust he put in young players, and I think that would be something that would be quite exciting at Spurs. But I feel like Xavi is does he speak it? Oh, he does speak English actually. I've seen him do interviews on CBS, so maybe it's interesting. I mean, yeah,
I think it's a risk. I do think it's a bit of a risk.
For me, with Xavi, he's from the sort of La Masia school all the way through in terms of both playing career and coaching career. I think that way of playing is so wedded not only to Spanish culture, but also Barcelona culture, and the type of players they have coming through.
It's interesting because I was reading some stuff from at the end of last season. Sorry to interrupt, but when they said they were apparently one of the reasons that they were unhappy with Xavi was because they didn't feel like they were playing the free-flowing sort of possession-based football.
I'm pretty sure. I mean, the squad. I looked back at the squad he had there, and it was not great. And I think the his ideal way of playing, I think, is definitely probably under that school of thought. And I think he probably did 100%. Compromise on those ideals. But you don't want to get a manager in to play in a compromised way. You want them to come in and play the way they want to play, I guess. I mean, we interviewed him because at Coach's Voice, and a lot of his stuff was about kind of the philosophy that he learned from Barcelona, and I just think the technical floor of our squad is nowhere near good enough at this point to employ a manager like that, and it would really have to shift. And I think part of our recruitment has been good in the last couple of years, but I think for something we haven't solved is kind of raising that technical floor, and we've put ourselves back a little bit, I think, by prioritizing athleticism over technical ability, especially if we're going to try and employ a coach like that. So I think for me, again, like I spoke earlier, but not meaning he's a bad coach, but bad fit in my eyes for this squad.
I think it's too much of a risk to I think it's. Would you say that it's a complete avoid, or would you just say that this is too big of a risk?
I'd say big. I'd just say no. I'd say avoid probably.
Tough. Yeah,
I'd say avoid not because of who he is as a coach, but one. I mean, this is never happening. By the way, it's just there's no way.
Exactly. No, unrealistic as well.
It's going to be very interesting to see what his next move is, though. I wonder where he does go.
I feel like the club outside of Barcelona or the Spanish league that's most likely for a manager like that is PSG. Look at what Luis Enrique's doing now. I feel like PSG, maybe if Enrique moves on at any point, could be the next step for Xavi. Maybe international management too. But you're completely right. He does feel very sort of Spanish league, Barcelona, and I feel Barcelona is his club. It's like Zidane with Real Madrid. It's like Zidane's just not done much afterwards, and it's like maybe he's that sort of manager where he feels like that's what he was meant for. I don't know what his ambitions are really, but he's never coming to Spurs. I can tell you that for free. No, never ever.
I think it's too much of a risk right now. It's not a risk enough to be like, oh, okay, I'm slightly intrigued by that. I feel like
that avoid category should also have a little star that says in brackets avoid not to save yourself embarrassment from the manager not coming to us as well.
Yeah, partly that, or they should avoid us.
He should avoid us. 100%.
Let's talk about. Let's move on. Let's get the Poch conversation out of the way as well, because there was. I mean, I feel like I fell into it for 5 minutes where I was like, you know what, Let's just get him back. I need to feel something again. But
We all did.
I think we did. A lot of people did for like 5-10 minutes when those photos came out with Levy and where he did those interviews where he's twerking for Spurs, saying that one day I'd love to come back, and it's like, yeah, that'd be great one day, but maybe it's not what we need right now. And also, he's in a contract with the US, which is going to be very difficult to get him out of. And also, it's not exactly like he's ripping up any trees over in America. Like, they've had 2 very disappointing results in his first.
Does stink, though.
It's awful. But there's also players that maybe he's not necessarily given chances to. I'm not sure. I was watching something the other day with Landon Donovan and Tim Howard where they were talking about. And it's happened with a lot of managers not giving players like Gio Reyna a chance because they feel like
Gio Reyna seems like a lost cause though.
Yeah,
no one seems
they
to
felt
want
like
to give
he's
him a
not
chance, to be honest.
physically capable to do what Poch wants to do. I always thought it'd be interesting to see how
They also lost to Panama. It's not like they lost to anyone major. So.
It wasn't Brazil exactly. It was a last minute winner against Panama where they were like a lot of US fans were just like, I don't know what we're trying to be. I can't see. And don't get me wrong, like Poch has had that in like early days where he's been in the past. Especially at Tottenham, like this is a guy that was going to get sacked 10 games into his career with us, and Harry Kane's deflected free kick kind of saved him. But
what a moment, man!
It does, what a moment! It does feel like I was always intrigued to see how Poch's style would translate to international football.
I wouldn't pay attention to managers at international level. Like you've literally just seen Hansi Flick fail in the Germany job and produce one of the best sides in European football that we've seen. Of course,
but I just thought Poch was always linked with a lot of bigger international jobs. Like he was linked with England 100%. Quite a lot. I was just kind of intrigued to see how that style translates. But also, like I think a lot of people have had reservations about how his style stacks up in the modern game in the Premier League. Yeah. Kish, what do you think about a potential return for Poch? Not necessarily, I mean, this conversation is specifically about who should be our next manager, but even if it's not this summer, if it's further down the line, maybe it's next year after the World Cup, how would you feel about Poch returning to Spurs, or how do you feel his style kind of stacks up to what I know the Premier League is kind of ever-changing, but how do you feel it would live up to what people would need?
To be honest, like when he went to Chelsea, that was it for me. Like I don't... I think I'm that maybe that kind of person that like when those things happen.
The Chelsea thing didn't hit me that much because at the start I was kind of like, you know what, I don't really care because I'm really excited about Ange and kind of all in. And I was like, when we played them, I was like, nah, I was like, he can have it. But I was like, it didn't hurt me loads. I don't think
it didn't hurt me massively, but I'm just like, well, fine. There's so many other coaches in the world. Like we had our time with Poch. Yeah. You don't go to also. We were fighting for leagues with Chelsea. There was a massive rivalry there at the time.
Can I just tell you that he's a bit of a like? I've always thought with Poch, he's a bit of a bullshitter. Like he says what he thinks that people want to hear, and like he was always saying like he's so Tottenham and like Tottenham's his club, it's in his heart, he wants to go back. And then going to Chelsea, like I get that you're a manager, you've got to make money, whatever.
Part of me thinks as well with that, it's because he hasn't succeeded really in any of his jobs to the level that people would necessarily expect him. So I think part of me does think that he's kind of just clinging on to that for dear life.
And also just stop saying it. Like he says it like every 2-3 months is I want to come back to Tottenham one day. It's like, okay, we understand. Like it's not happening right now, and maybe down the line when all this kind of stuff has blown over. But again, like it's not like there's no massive evidence that he's done anything major. I think the back end of his Chelsea tenure was good, not amazing, but good. I think with Poch as well, part of him is building that kind of character and philosophy throughout the whole club. And I think that's why I don't see it working in international football. It's like he doesn't get enough time with the players, doesn't get enough kind of. He needs the full buy-in, and he needs 100%. To kind of turn out the right personalities and all that kind of thing. I just don't see it with him. I think his football again was heavily reliant on pressing. I can't say I watched so much of his Chelsea side, but what I know is that it's again very heavy on pressing, like no real kind of innovation of kind of new build-up patterns or anything like that. They've massively stood out to me anyway, but I'm not going to say I've watched loads of him since he's left. But he would.
I feel like when he was at Chelsea, they really struggled to break teams down that sat in deeper blocks against them. And then sort of when they were sat in like 10th or 11th, that little run at the end of the season was almost just like, all right, well, Chelsea have been so poor for the first half of the season, the first 8 months of the season, that they just had a bit more freedom. Teams were maybe trying to come out against them a little bit more, and they started picking up more results and putting in more performances. I don't think there was anything like that special that changed.
No, nothing really. No, I agree. Nothing massively stood out. It wasn't exactly an impressive. That run at the end of the season kind of papered over the cracks massively. Also, that's an issue that Poch has had kind of throughout his career. You think about the biggest drawback of his Tottenham team was probably that inability, even with the creativity that we had with the likes of Eriksen, Kane, Dele, etc. At times, struggling to find solutions to break down teams that would sit in. And I know, 100%. That's not just a Poch specific thing. Like, I remember Arne Slot did an interview a few months ago. I think it was after Liverpool drew to Forest, where he was like, sometimes it is just okay as a manager to come out and say, we struggle to break them down. They were set up really well. But it does feel like it's an issue that's kind of followed Poch around a little bit. Definitely. And it's been one of his biggest drawbacks. So I think
when we were in our prime under him, we just blew teams away with our intensity and the quality that we Christian Eriksen in his prime, he's unlocking any defense. He was that good.
Yeah.
Then you got Harry Kane, the amount of different weapons he had going forwards. I don't know. Sometimes you do wonder with managers. Sometimes how much. Well, obviously, you've got to give him massive praise, and he was brilliant for us. But you've also got to say, the amount of unbelievable players that we had in the right moment in that side, how much did that play into sort of... But then again, he developed a lot of those players. So
he deserves a lot of credit for what he did. Yeah. I do think there's been an element of some fans I saw there was a podcast clip from some Tottenham podcast going around the other day where they were kind of trying to rewrite history a little bit with Poch and saying that he actually wasn't as good as people made him out to be, and that's just not really true. Yes, it all fell apart towards the end, but I also think he was failed, like many managers have been and will be in the future, by the people that were above him. He knew what he needed and he didn't get that, and it was all kind of going a bit sour and south towards the end. But the football that we played for that last season at White Hart Lane and the first year at Wembley as well, I thought we were brilliant for a lot of the games. Especially in the Champions League, and he knew how to get the best out of his players and keep a young group really hungry and motivated, which again, they are possible pluses for coming into Tottenham. But I do think there's that thing of just never go back. It's never going to be as good as you think it is. So I'd probably avoid him right now.
It could never live up to expectations, I don't think.
It's also such a Levy thing to do, of an easy PR move of just let's get the fans back on side. It just doesn't really make sense, I think.
It all comes back to Levy, doesn't it? We're discussing managers and everything, but as we all know, the overarching conversation is it all comes back to Daniel Levy and the shambles that he's run over the past 24 years, really. But he's going to be our owner, so you've got to sort of see how best we can make of that situation, I guess.
Let's go through a few managers that aren't necessarily in the conversation. We'll kind of finish up talking about a few of the other managers that are more at the forefront. Let's talk about Kieran McKenna. Obviously Ipswich. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about Ipswich, and it was on the Ripple Effect, and they were talking about actually, when you think about how well Ipswich recruited, and yes, they were massive underdogs to kind of stay up and stay in the division, I've actually been quite disappointed with them. I think they've been really poor over the last few months. They're winners in 2025, and I don't feel like I've necessarily seen enough, not necessarily enough adaptation from Kieran McKenna, but I really like him. I think he's got a high ceiling as a coach. I think he could go on to achieve good things. I think he's done obviously brilliantly with Ipswich. You can't deny that, but I've been a little bit disappointed by him and Ipswich this season. Kish, what do you think about Kieran McKenna?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's one of those situations where he should have left, in my eyes, on a high. He was wanted by Chelsea and United in the summer. Yeah. And, you never know when you're going to get that opportunity again. I think, what he did with Ipswich was outrageous. Double promotions is just unheard of. It's crazy. And, a lot of this squad, I mean, he's got some good players in the squad, but there are also some areas where they're sort of League One level.
Defense.
They really lack Premier League experience as well. The amount of minutes, they've brought in some real talent, but the lack of Premier League minutes in that team is frightening when you go through it. It's so inexperienced.
And it's one of those where now if he goes back down, I'm sure he'll stay. But it's you don't know you're going to come back up with. They haven't got an outrageous squad where they're definitely coming back up.
Because the better players will probably get picked off. The Lap's not going to be there next season.
The Lap will be gone.
He's way too good for the Championship.
I don't necessarily write him off as a top coach. I just think it's such an unnecessary risk right now, especially as there's sort of similar but more experienced type coaches, because he's quite adaptable. He's willing to change his shape. He's willing to kind of work around the profiles he has. So, like for example, I think he played a bit of a elbow back four with like Leif Davis as a kind of flying wing back, and then I can't remember who they had in the championship as like sort of a left winger who sort of came into the 10 area to give Leif Davis that space. I think like he does adapt to his profiles.
Connor Chaplin,
Colin Chaplin, that's it.
Yeah.
And which is something I do want from our next manager. I want them to adapt to the squad. But there's people above him basically, and I just think it's an avoid right now.
I
Feels
think
like
so.
a mental risk to take, wouldn't it? Really, yeah. I think he's adapted his play style from League One, then to the Championship, then to the Prem. But they've been getting blown away in 2025. I think
Feels like the players have given up a bit, I think, as well.
I feel like
Feels
they
like they
just-
know they're down. It's like
It was weird recruitment. Like they've got enough in attacking areas, and they went and like got Enciso on loan. I really rate Enciso. Like it was a big sort of coup for them in January. But you thought they were screaming out for defenders. Like they're at the back. They were just being sort of torn apart. But yeah, I think it's maybe
I think
mental.
that's still poor.
Yeah, like they
Yeah,
had
it is.
Kajus who I like.
Yeah,
on loan
he's
from
decent.
Napoli.
He's
But
decent,
then
but
who plays next to him?
Morsey
Yeah.
Sam Morsey, yeah.
and Phillips
Phillips.
is past it. Like
Right, let's talk about Edin Terzic then. Obviously, he's been out of a job since he left Dortmund in the summer after the Champions League final. He's someone that's actually been heavily linked with Tottenham throughout the duration of the season when we've gone through a little bit of a wobble with Ange because he's been out of a job. And obviously, a lot of these managers here, I think he is the only... Is he the only manager out of a job at the moment? And Xavi, obviously, out of the managers we're talking about. So his name has tended to come up a lot. What are your thoughts on him, Kish? Because I feel like a lot of Spurs fans have kind of looked down their nose a little bit at Terzic throughout the season when he's been linked. There's not been a lot of good kind of will towards him, or not a lot of great words spoken about him when he's been linked. I don't know whether that's just because Spurs fans want a better name. He's going to play more progressive football. Obviously, of course, these are things that you want. But how do you rate Terzic as a potential option when it comes to the summer?
for me, not the right option. He's pretty pragmatic. I know Dortmund fans sort of willed for him back after they went with Sahin after, so they
Yeah.
brought in Terzic, but sort of had Shaheen working under him, and then with potential for him to kind of take over as a more progressive, like young, exciting option. And I think that completely backfired. Obviously, they got rid of Shaheen now. Um, but Terzic, yeah, he wasn't for the Dortmund fan base, and it will be, I assume, similar for the Spurs fan base, progressive enough.
Yeah.
Um, just very pragmatic, like a tactician, but who would kind of be solid first and too reactive in my eyes than proactive. Sort of set up for certain opposition. I mean, we interviewed him as well, and he was talking about the PSG game, which Dortmund beat them in the semi-finals of the Champions League, and I think
Yeah. Matt's Hummels
PSG, to be
masterclass.
honest, played them off the park that day.
Yeah.
Hit the post about 5 times, and what I mean, he spoke so well, and like it was really interesting and insightful about the ways he kind of combated how they play and how they Dortmund kind of played in the mid block, and how they looked to defend against Hakimi and Dembele on the same side, and they were all kind of very tactical and creative ways of being defensively solid in a way. But again, very, very reactive rather than proactive. And as a club like Dortmund, who do have the quality to go out and play good football, especially domestically, Dortmund fans really weren't happy with that, I don't think, or a lot of them. They weren't kind of convinced by the play style. And so, yeah, I mean, I think we've been there with those type of managers. Not that he's as big a name as Mourinho or anyone, but yeah, I think we're on a path to kind of try and play progressive football that suits these young, kind of talented players we have, and I would avoid him personally.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. He's never really moved me or excited me as a coach. Obviously, did a great job at Dortmund to be able to get them to the final last year in the Champions League against kind of all odds, but they were incredibly lucky in that game. I haven't watched a hell of a lot of Terzic. I can't tell you the ins and outs of kind of his style, but that's the kind of vibe I've always got. He's more of a
To be honest,
pragmatist
I'd
first.
probably have him in doesn't move me if we're gonna have
Yeah,
someone in there.
yeah,
Yeah.
Because I don't think I think he's actually very tactically capable, and you know, a lot of managers go on to learn from their first managerial experience. Like that was his first proper job, and you know, it for what it was pretty successful. And maybe he's sort of learned a lot from that, and he did sound like in the interview that he took a lot from that experience and kind of is always trying to kind of improve. And so it's not a definite that he would play that way and be as pragmatic at Spurs. So, you know, it's still not like a major hit, but I don't think it's necessarily completely a void.
yeah. Seb, any thoughts on that?
No, yeah, I hear that a lot. I watched the main bit of Terzic I watched was in the Champions League last year, and yeah, like Kish said, it's sort of one of those where yeah they got to the final, but it was a massive performance from Hummels in that game. Their keeper as well, is it? What's their keeper? The Swiss guy, Kobel, is it?
Yeah,
In
yeah.
goal. Yeah, massive performances from them, and they were lucky to go through in that game. Obviously, like Kish said, really defensively solid, sound, and I guess you can't say it's luck really when you defend that well. But yeah, I think he's not one that moves me. He's not one that massively excites me. I'd maybe like to see him get another job. He feels West Ham. I don't know why he feels West Ham.
Yeah, I know what you
To
mean.
me, he feels like
He
that
was
sort of
at West
manager where
Ham.
maybe.
He was
He
at
was,
West
yeah, he
Ham
was,
as
wasn't he Slaven Bilic's
Philip.
assistant?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
was he?
yeah.
Oh, maybe that's where that link comes from then. But I feel like maybe if he gets a job in and around that, say maybe Marco Silva moves on from Fulham or Frank moves on from Brentford, maybe that could be a great next step for him in
Yeah,
terms of seeing him get that Premier League experience. But yeah, that doesn't move me really.
yeah, I'd agree with that. What about Kish? What do you make of Francesco Farioli? Obviously at Ajax, probably he's the youngest coach
Doing
that is on
brilliantly,
this
isn't
list.
he?
He's only 35. Very young
Yeah.
Italian coach has done obviously really well with it. Feels like Ajax have been quite turbulent over the last couple of years, and I feel like this season he's kind of really been able to steady that ship a little bit and play good, exciting, attacking football that's kind of been on brand for what Ajax are all about and what they've wanted to do. How high did you rate him as an option potentially? Obviously very young, it feels like a bit of a risk for Tottenham, but what could he potentially bring if he was to come in?
I really like him. From the outside looking in, this is for me one of Ajax's worst squads I've seen in some time.
Yeah, it's really
Um,
not great.
in the last 10 to 15 years, I feel like there's always been like 4 or 5 players I'd definitely take from Ajax and young, exciting players and whatever. And I think at the moment it's not exciting. There's a couple obviously, but yeah, it's not the best. I think his football reminds me a bit of De Zerbi, in terms of build up. He's very like methodical with his build up, and he builds with a tends to build with a 4 and 2, a bit like how De Zerbi did, where you know they're enticing that press, and as soon as they break through that press, they're suddenly on the counter attack. And I find that football really entertaining,
Yeah,
um, and it's yeah, and it suits the modern game very well, and that's kind of where he was at with Nice, which is where I kind of saw more of him. He had, I think, I'm pretty sure, especially when we wrote an article on him, that he had the best defensive record in France with Nice. Um, and so he is not like super expansive, but he's very controlled and possession heavy. And bits of his football can be really exciting. I think for me, it's a good fit. I'm not sure how adaptable he is. I'm not sure how he integrates young players. Those are things that are up in the air, I think. I think with Ajax, he still seems to pick a lot of the experienced players, which is obviously not necessarily what they do.
yeah.
So he hasn't been crazy on integrating young players. But in terms of just on the pitch and the way he plays, I like him, and he'll definitely bring a kind of solidity to the club while still playing pretty expansive football.
Yeah, the thing that I've been most impressed with him is how he's interacted with the fans. So I think they were a very split fan base, Ajax, in terms of like they didn't really know which direction they were going. There was so much turbulence at the club, and I've seen clips of him going sort of into the fans when they've been crowded around the team bus and speaking and sort of being this charismatic figure, which I think maybe you wouldn't expect from somebody that young. But I feel like he'd be somebody that definitely could get the fans on side and sort of win the fans over, which I think is the first step for any manager coming to a club. Is some managers you see they sort of don't really win over the fans, results start going wrong, and it can turn quite quickly if the fans aren't convinced. But I feel like he's someone who won't have that, and he'll definitely be able to get the fan base on side if he comes to England. Then obviously, hopefully, the football will follow on from that. But yeah, I don't know, maybe if he wins the league title with Ajax, he might be somebody that would be attracted by the bigger job if Spurs are going to go for him. I definitely think he'd be someone that would be a realistic option for us.
Yeah. I still think he's got a lot to learn. I think he's got a lot to learn still. I think it would be.
Yeah.
I think it probably makes sense to put him in big risk just because of the lack of experience.
100%.
But I think he's got all of the kind of exciting fundamentals in terms of that attacking philosophy, which would make sense for someone like a Spurs further down the line in terms of what we're building towards and what we want to do and the kind of type of coach that we should be looking for, 100%. And I think Sebastian Hoeneß kind of fits into that category as well. Obviously, from what I've seen of him at Hoffenheim and Stuttgart, it was Hoffenheim he was at before, wasn't he? I'm pretty sure.
Pretty sure it was Tottenham, yeah. I'm pretty sure.
He's kind of tinkered quite a lot in terms of his tactics, like a back four, a back five as well. They're quite aggressive out of possession.
Key players and
lost a lot
again.
Yeah, I really like what I've seen from him, and he's been someone that's been touted quite heavily. Obviously, they had an amazing season last year. Stuttgart got into the Champions League.
And they've had big injuries this year.
Yeah, they've really.
And yeah, he reminds me of sort of a baby Nagelsmann, like similar, like progressive football, but also adaptable. Like we'll build up in a certain way dependent on how the opposition press. Obviously, proper German coach that loves the counter pressing, but also has a kind of controlled element to his game in possession. I've seen some people compare him to Slot in terms of philosophy, which I don't think is too far away. I think he's a great coach, and this is kind of the kind of profile of coach I'd really like, is like someone who is willing to adapt in terms of shape and kind of personnel, but in terms of principles and philosophy, they stay the same. And I think that's somewhere where Ange has gone wrong. Sorry, it's like the system hasn't changed enough, and those tweaks haven't been made, and so it's hard to buy into the overall philosophy when there are such obvious tweaks you can make to it. I just hope that is Langer leading the kind of recruitment of manager rather than Levy, because I think Levy can tend to give into the noise and the kind of the optics rather than the actual smart choice. And I think like
100%.
We've seen that with the say no to Gattuso thing, which happened when we nearly got Gattuso as our manager and then suddenly cancelled. It's like, you should never, that Gattuso was never the right appointment, but you should never be able to give in to what the fans are saying about what manager, like you should have the processes in place where you back your recruitment of players and staff to that level where we get the right people in. And so, I think that's one caveat we should make, that this should come down to a similar process of how we recruit players. It should be the same with the manager.
Thankfully, it doesn't sound like it's going to be Paratici leading it this time, because there were a lot of talks about Paratici coming back, but it seems like his kind of deal with AC Milan is getting closer and closer.
He's our saviour.
Honestly, the way that he kind of gets spoken about is absolutely bizarre to me, really.
Yeah.
But I think Lang, I've been quite impressed with Johan Lang. I do think
so overhated just because, I don't know, is it like an aesthetics thing? Is it an aura thing?
I think
with
it's just
him?
fans are so desperate for those constant nuggets of dopamine, of constant transfer links.
Because he's not wearing wired headphones on the side of a pitch. He can't be working. It's like,
I mean, I got a little bit sucked in on the side of the pitch anyway. They're just they're not supposed to be at the games, or they're not supposed to be with the manager and stuff. They're supposed to be somewhere else high up, like doing their own thing.
I got a little bit sucked into the land stuff in terms of, I was like, what are we doing? Like, it doesn't seem like we're doing anything in January. And obviously, I don't think he's perfect or anything like that. And I think that there were some communication issues, and I don't think he's a particularly charismatic character. But in terms of the signings that we've made under him so far, we haven't done enough business, which has been the major problem. But the business that we have done, I've quite liked, especially the younger talent. He clearly has an eye for young talent. Clearly, that's undeniable at this point. And Dominic Solanke was somebody who I don't think we'd have signed under Paratici. I think that was an incredibly smart signing for Ange Postecoglou's system, and he went out and did that. And I feel like maybe I definitely have more confidence in Johan Lange in terms of somebody he doesn't want to be a public figure. He doesn't want to be somebody who's in the spotlight, which is exactly what you should want your sporting director to be.
Just happy to do his job.
Paratici loves the limelight when he's on the bench and he's bellowing, and the fans love it because he's so passionate about the club, and he's been to jail and stuff, and people love that. And it's like it's honestly like
Also,
it's kind of mental.
That passion thing. You don't want your director of football to be. You want them to think straight. You don't want them to be like a fan. You want them to be able to like look at all the aspects of a player or a manager and be able to weigh those up without any kind of subjective bias or anything.
100%.
I think
And
I
he
think
got
also
massive
Lango
credit.
with Lango, it's like the quantity of signings I'd imagine are not down to him. I think like
No,
he
100%.
brings his list, and I'm still convinced that Levy has say on how many players we buy or the fees we pay for these players. I don't think Langer has the power to be like, no, we need to sign
No.
this. So I think
100%.
basically what we can do is really judge him on what has been brought in, and to be honest, barring I don't know, has he had a proper miss yet?
A lot of people said about Dragusin, but I think I saw Paul O'Keefe the other day saying that Paratici had a lot of involvement in that.
But that's the thing with Paratici. He loves the Serie A. He got so much credit at the bank for the Kulusevski and Bentancur, which, fair enough.
And
that
Romero,
was great
to
at
be
the
fair.
time. And Romero. And don't get me wrong, Fabio Paratici is clearly a talented sporting director. Like, he did some good things for our club. But, like, to have him up as this, like, godlike figure, when clearly there's been a bit of sort of a black mark against him behind the scenes in terms of he's moved in the grey very much so to the point where he's been caught from it and banned from football, which I know a lot of people don't necessarily care about that, but like a guy who can operate like that and somebody who, very, very heavily tapped into the Italian market, which is the Serie A, the best translation to the Premier League right now in terms of stylistically and fit for players. I'm not sure, obviously there's definitely an opportunity, a market opportunity over there. But I think on Johan Lange. How did we get onto that conversation?
Well, we were talking about in terms of Lang leading the recruitment of the manager, and I do think maybe like it'd be interesting to see. I know obviously the youngest that we've got on this list is Farioli, but Sebastian Hoeneß is obviously isn't old by any stretch of the imagination, still quite young in his career as a manager. It'd be interesting to see whether, like, I know obviously Iraola is the favourite, but as some alternative options
really
where they do go down the younger route. He, for me, would go into solid. I think the job that he did at Stuttgart last season to finish second in the way he did, I know Bayern kind of fell away and Leverkusen run away with the title, and like you said, Kish, like some helpful context in terms of the injuries. I think Zagadu's been one of the big ones that's been out injured for quite a while, like missed quite a lot of the season. Obviously they've had Champions League football to kind of put on top of that as well. They are really interesting and exciting to watch, and I do think maybe I could see that style, and that, like you said, what I like about him as well is that commitment to his principles, but also the flexibility to change the tactics, but still keep the philosophy of what he wants to do. So I think for me, he goes into there.
And also in terms of getting him, he's had 2 years at Stuttgart
Should
now.
be fairly straightforward.
Champions League both times, obviously. The wage increase and stuff. It should be one that definitely is realistic for us again.
Let's get Inzaghi out of the way because this is not happening.
Dream.
But this, I mean, I imagine for everybody would just go straight in there. Like what?
Yeah, I mean,
what? It's just not going to happen, though, is it?
He's because if he wins, I was doing some research on this the other day. If he wins the domestic double this year, which is very much on, he becomes the Inter manager with the most amount of trophies in their history, and he's only been there for 4 years. Yeah, Mancini has 7, and someone else has 7. I can't remember his name. That person did win 2 European Cups, but in terms of just number of trophies, Inzaghi would be on 8, and that would be the most ever. And he's dealt with a lot of squad turnover. They don't spend much money at all. He's turned
loads of free signings.
Yeah, he's turned certain players into £100 million assets, probably, like Bastoni, Barella, DeMarco. Like
Even
those
like
are
the
all.
adaptation of like players like Chanaloglu as well, like what he's kind of done with
Yeah,
them as well.
amazing.
Then they bought
was
in.
a 10.
Yeah, and he's their holder now, and then they've obviously got Thuram on a free, who's ripping up this season. Bissek, I don't know. I think he was quite cheap. He turned him into a top centre back. He's just a top coach. I think there's not much more to say on that. He has Inter punching above their weight constantly, and that's what there is. I think
Amazing.
It's funny because it's like you think about it. I made a video a while back saying I think Inter are like dark horses for the Champions League, but it sounds silly to say that in a way that obviously they got to the Champions League final a couple of seasons ago, but they are still massively punching above their weight.
Well.
Yeah, they were, and they like you said, they are still massively punching above their weight when you think about the lack of resources financially for them, and in terms of like making do with what he's got and adapting to that. He might be the best. Like he's the best manager on this list, full stop. Obviously,
yeah.
But he was also probably the best at that.
In the realms of Levy as well, I genuinely think you couldn't get a better fit.
Yeah.
He's quite he's wedded to a back three. I think pretty well at Lazio, and Inter's only played the back three. I mean, I wouldn't put it past him being flexible with that, but he's also very much kind of profiles players correctly and works to players' strengths. But yeah, he seems to never really have much complaints with the board. I think Inter's board are pretty broke. I'm pretty sure. I mean, they seem to have to sell players all the time, and he seems to just get on with it. And I think, yeah, we couldn't get a better manager than him in my eyes.
No,
Just
Maybe
it
not.
threw me back then to the Bastoni transfer saga of 2022 when
Killer.
I remember sitting at work and it's like, right, okay, Pracci's gone in for a meeting with.
That's what you
how
don't
do you
want.
think-
Though. You don't want these
No.
pictures coming out. Like,
No, it was absolutely crazy.
100%. He's also, I mean, in terms of that Champions League final that they went to, I mean, the Champions League run was great and stuff. They beat AC Milan.
They beat Milan in the semis or the quarters. I think it was even the
And then
semis.
they beat someone else.
final. Yeah, the final in terms of coming up against one of the best club sides
It was
we've
Benfica.
ever seen. Inter Milan deserved something out of that game. The Lukaku missed chances. I thought they nullified City's threat incredibly well. Haaland didn't get a sniff. It was sort of one moment and City scored from it. And there was an amazing performance from them. It was just they were so unfortunate. Could you imagine they won the Champions League? How much more credit he would get as a coach?
I also think
for doing
I'm pretty
that.
sure they only conceded one goal in the whole of that Champions League phase.
I mean,
Maybe
they've
they
got
did.
them sort of conceding goals record in the Champions League at the moment. They've only conceded like one goal in the last 8 games or something mental. Like crazy side.
And you wouldn't. I mean, like you'd have to make you. So you couldn't make either of those two teams strong favourites, Inter or Bayern. That's going to be a fascinating game, that quarter-final. But they've got a real chance. Like Bayern have got more firepower and more. Yeah, but Inter, if I still think I know it's like I said, they got to the final. It's crazy to say that they're dark horses, but they still are. And the job that he's done in amongst all of that and the kind of chaos that Italian football generally can be, and the way that Inter have been run is just even more testament to him. Final two then, two more realistic options, two names that have kind of been spoken about a lot. Marco Silva is obviously coming into this conversation off the back of a 3-0 defeat against Crystal Palace in the FA Cup. But before that, it was a 2-0 win against Tottenham, unsurprisingly. Marco Silva is a manager that, for me, he's never really, I've never really paid that much attention to him since he left Everton. I feel like I've always kind of he's always existed, but I've never really thought too much about how they play or maybe given him credit for the job that he's kind of done. But obviously he did a good job at Fulham to get them back up. Well, no, did he get them back up? Oh, no, it's Parker, wasn't it? Parker got them back up. But no, they went down again and came back up with Marco Silva, didn't they? So, and I think as well, when you think of the job that he's doing, I was looking at the Fulham squad the other day, and because I was thinking about if you've got the three.
Not that special.
It's not that special at all. And because I was thinking about it, if you've got Iraola, Frank, and Silva, if you wanted all of them to bring, I was thinking about it for a video. I was like, if you wanted them to bring one player with them from their club if they came, and I was looking at Fulham, and I was going through the squad, and I was like, that's really, really underwhelming.
Sasa Lukic, mate, what a player!
But he's I do like. There's some good players there, but he has done that. I think he's overachieved with Fulham this season with the squad that they've got 100%.
Yeah, he has. Especially with players like Smith Rowe not really doing what he was brought in to do that was their big
he's
money
been really
signing.
underwhelming the last
People
few
just
months.
think he's had a good. I feel like because he scored a few in the first month or two, people just presume he's had a good season. He's actually been quite poor every time I've watched them. Been really ineffective for them at times. Iwobi's been so much better.
Yeah,
I think in those
but I
roles.
think with Silva, I do still. Part of me still isn't that. I think. I don't know.
I'm not massively
it
sold.
It doesn't move me that much. I think he's quite volatile as well, which I'm not massively keen on in terms of his personality. There's a lot of excuses constantly being made after defeats.
Yeah,
and
I don't love him as a personality.
I think he's a good coach. 100% he's a good coach, but I think I would probably. I wouldn't avoid him. He was actually. I think that it came out last week, wasn't it? That he was the third. He was interviewed for the job 2 summers ago, and I think he was third in the kind of hierarchy or standings of managers, and obviously we went with Ange. But what do you think about Silva, Kish? Where's he kind of fit for you on this?
As a coach, I really like him. I agree with the personality side of things. He doesn't move me at all in terms of the way he speaks. But I think he's one that could go up a level, and adapt to what he has. I think he's done such a good job of, like you said, dealing with a weaker squad and just platforming them in the right way. just making things just simple, like in terms of okay, we've got Sanderberger coming in. How does he best suit this midfield? Okay, let's just have him sitting in there, cleaning up and playing simple passes. Okay, we've got Anthony Robinson, who's best on the touchline. Let's allow the left winger to drift inside to give that space, Anthony Robinson to constantly go up and down the line. It's just very simple, like ways he just platforms these players, and the market they shop in is often like Premier League flops, basically, or
Yeah.
like past it players or very cheap European signings. They don't really go big on signings ever. I can't really think of, apart from the likes of Smith Rowe or
He was their record
whoever.
signing, wasn't it? For
Yeah,
35 mil, which
yeah,
is not much
exactly.
at
And
all in
like
the Premier League these days.
Andres Pereira, like he transformed him. It's just like I just like the way that he kind of fits everything together, and just comes up with these like combinations between little duos across the pitch or little trios that just complement each other. And I think because we're at quite a low point right now, that seems like just something I want. Like I just really I trust our like I really like our squad, and I think because they're so young, I'm not convinced that this next appointment is going to be the one to take us to like these massive heights. I think there will be a sort of transition period, and I just want someone to be able to
Yeah.
get the best out of them at that point and
Yeah,
develop
it's a
them
great
well.
point, actually. Really is a
And
great point.
yeah, I think yeah. So that's why I've been quite keen on Marco Silva. I just think he's used to the league. He plays for his players' strengths.
Yeah.
Um, he's adaptable. He likes to dominate the ball. I think Fulham's build up for what they have at the back is actually pretty good. Um, yeah, I just think for me, a pretty solid option. He's not first choice for
Yeah.
me. I personally prefer him to Iraola just for the fit, not as a coach, not as necessarily as a coach full stop, just for us.
Yeah.
I'd still prefer Hoeneß to him. So for me, he's in solid, but I
I
also
think
understand the doesn't move me side of things as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
100%.
think I do think he's a good option. I think I was kind of like leaning a little bit more on the personality side of things, but I do think, like you said, and like I said at the start, in terms of getting the best out of a quite average bunch of players, that's one thing I have been quite impressed with from this season is their build up out from the back. Bear in mind they've got not exactly two technicians at centre half. I know
Massive.
Anderson loves a diag, but he's not exactly one you want breaking the lines. And Calvin Bassey, I
No.
think, is actually
Yeah.
I know. Obviously, Calvin Bassey struggled last season, especially at the start when he was like playing more on the right,
Right.
on his weaker foot.
Yeah.
And yeah, we targeted him big time in that game that we played against them at home.
He's
But
brilliant
actu-
for us.
Yeah, yeah, he was. But actually, he's kind of the way he sort of. I still don't think he's great at all. But like, he's had a much better season this year at Fulham,
Yeah.
and I think he's actually has a big part in their build up. And Anthony Robinson kind of pushing a lot on beyond him, does a lot of covering work for him as well. They're very well disciplined, that Fulham team as well, and maybe just that solid option is maybe what Spurs kind of do need right now, and just in terms of maximising the strengths of the players, like you say. So I think he probably does go in here. I think for me, like you said, he'd be behind. I think for me, he'd probably be behind these two, but I
Yeah.
can understand why you'd want him over Iraola. So I think we would probably all agree going there. But the final one is Thomas Frank, and I think he's probably the most solid option that you could get, just in terms of like the track record that he's built up in the league, the way that he's changed and tinkered with his style over the years to suit the situations that he's found himself in, the way that he gets his best out of his players, the way that he's worked with young players and more experienced players as well. I think his personality, I think the way that he can make the fans kind of fall in love with him. I know we've had that with managers in the past. Spurs fans are very romantic, and
I'm already in love with him,
it
mate.
doesn't take much to kind of, yeah. But he seems like he's a guy with a lot of different game plans, can change in-game as well as from game to game, and can play like really exciting, aggressive attacking football as well. Like, I do think people think of Brentford. I feel like Brentford they know their level now in the Premier League. So I feel like you've seen a bit of a switch up this season where teams that are sort of below them in the pecking order in the Prem now, or teams that are just below them in the league, they come to the G-Tech, and where Brentford might have been a little bit more focused last season, more on counter-attacking against most opponents, kind of soaking up a bit of pressure, allowing teams to come onto them and then hitting them on the break. I feel like this season, from what I've seen anyway, where they feel like they know they can beat a team, even if that team is as good as them or maybe slightly better than them, at home they've been super. I know their home form has kind of dwindled recently, and it's actually their away form that's picked back up again. But they have been super aggressive at home, super suffocating in terms of their press, like being able to kind of break teams down. They've been
They have
relentless.
more of the ball than people think as well. Like I think their average possession stats are higher than both Fulham and Bournemouth
Yeah.
in the Premier League in terms of looking at that. I've spoken to a guy who works in and around the academy at Brentford, and you can see it on videos and stuff, and just how he operates. The guy, he said, like Thomas Frank is like infectious at the club in terms of an upbeat personality who's just so nice, so
Lives and
kind to
breathes it, doesn't he, I
everybody.
think?
Lives and breathes it. He's done this thing this year where he's hired these, I don't know if they're university students or people doing degrees and stuff, and he's brought them in and worked with them, and sort of having loads of different people giving him loads of different insight into things, and he just seems like an incredibly sort of progressive coach in terms of wanting to better himself from what I've seen, and obviously his team to what he's had to adapt to, the smallest budget in the Premier League of any team.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of the smaller teams in the Premier League rely on a great home sort of atmosphere and stuff, and I think Brentford have had that at times, but I don't think they're one of the bigger sides for that. And I think he's brilliant. The way that he speaks in press conferences, I love. I think he's really honest. I loved him when he appeared on, was it Monday Night Football he went on? I think it was.
He's done a lot of good stuff that's kind of opened him up from a tactical
His
perspective.
interview with
he's
JLA.
He's done that thing with James Alcott for Sky Sports. He did, obviously, he's done Coach's Voice as well.
Yeah,
Kish.
a while ago, to be fair, but yeah, he did.
Yeah.
In terms of a personality, he's my number one choice out of anybody on the list in terms of somebody who I'd want leading my club, which is why I'm so hot on him, because I think with Iraola, with Marco Silva, with Frank, I think all of those will probably adapt to a step up in the level of football, and sort of time will tell with them, really. But in terms of somebody who I'd want at the helm, I think Thomas Frank, I've said, is my number one.
Also, Johan Lange wanted him at Villa, didn't he? I'm pretty sure when Gerrard was sacked, before Emery, they were looking at Thomas Frank. United have looked at Frank as well.
Bayern have looked at him. There is something that really does attract me to him. I think he, like you said, his personality is infectious. I like his style as well, and the way he's tinkered over the years. His Brentford team, in the Championship, was super aggressive.
That's
very
why
high octane football. Very exciting.
I definitely want to go and watch more of that side because, because it's definitely he's even come out and said I would love to play more progressive football. Like that's the football I like and that's the football I believe in. But Brentford's squad is poor, really, really and truly. The squad is poor and they don't spend big. They lost Tony. Was it this summer or summer before?
Yeah, this summer. Yeah,
this summer.
Yeah, and he's just sort of got on with it. And personality wise, I really like him as well. I think what I've realized as well is these kind of idealist these things you just kind of realize as you support a club and the things that work and things that don't work with your club. I think these type of like idealist managers don't really work at Spurs because they need the specific players to fit into what they want to do. And I think where we're at as a club is I trust our recruitment in terms of just bringing in talent. I think we need more of it and we need more ready-made players as well. But I think the fact that we just bring in talent and we need a manager to kind of just platform that talent and think where's he going to fit? Where's he going to fit? How are they going to fit together? Personalities-wise, how do they kind of bring that right personality to the squad? I think all those things are just about kind of platforming, and as long as we can trust that recruitment, and we have kind of moved towards a more Brightonish, Brentfordish style of recruitment. I think it makes sense. The only two caveats I would say is one, Brentford don't really have an academy. I think they disbanded their academy. I wonder. I know you said he's worked with young players. I'm trying to think of who's broke through in Brentford and whether he is big on young players or not.
I think you've got I know he's not a kid, but you've got like Lewis Potter in that Brentford team. There's a few of the younger lads, but maybe not so much with kind of nurturing talent through obviously that no academy through to the first team. But he also seems like the sort of coach that I think would be open to that. Definitely, I feel like he's like in terms of how involved he is with everything else that goes on at the club. But to be honest, you're probably right. That Brentford team isn't. There's not a lot of
their academies.
kids
Their
there,
academies.
They don't have an academy, and if they don't buy young, then there's not they don't tend to buy that many young players. The other thing I was going to say is I just hope that because we've got a manager who's not from the Prem, that they aren't just saying, "Oh, now we want a manager from the Prem." I hope they just look at every manager in the same way and like don't just go, "Oh, we want Premier League experience," because that's not a reason to sign a manager. The manager needs to be the right fit.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm a bit worried about the reports coming out. Not that like they're necessarily going to be bad appointments, but just I want there to be a process in place that makes sense rather than this stuff we always do at Tottenham where we're just chasing something else and chasing the next thing and not having like a process we stick to. It's always
Yeah.
like, oh, this doesn't work. Let's just try this now. And then meanwhile, we're lagging behind on recruitment. And do you know what I mean? I want there to just be a solid process in place. So
Yeah.
hopefully that's what they stick with.
I think, like you said, I think that's the important thing with Tottenham is that, and I think you touched on it earlier with Juventus when we were talking about motto, is that it feels like we've jumped from thing to thing. It's like we've had an identity crisis a little bit as a club over the last sort of 5 years post Poch of like we want to go down this win now route. Then it was like we want to go with this kind of more unproven manager in someone like Postecoglou and kind of completely change the style of play again. That's going to need a whole lot of work. So I think that's why I'd be leaning towards a manager more like Frank, or although I'm not 100% sold on Silva, someone with that type of manager who is just able to work with what they've got and try and get the best out of that group of players rather than kind of completely having to shift and change, and someone that is so clear and wedded to a style like Iraola. I feel like Frank would be a better appointment. I really do. And I also think he kind of gives you that thing that Spurs fans do feel like they need of just like, I really want to get behind this guy. I really want to get behind this personality and kind of put him on this. Look what we did to Ange like the start of the season last year, like how quickly fans sort of fell in love with him. I do feel like Spurs fans need to feel that connection. Every club does, obviously, especially where with Spurs we've kind of been so devoid of that success and kind of chasing the next thing. If you feel like you've got something to get behind, and I feel like Frank does kind of bring that with his personality, like the sort of community feel that he's created at Brentford. But then again, the lights are going to shine brighter. The scrutiny is going to be a lot bigger at a club like Tottenham than it is with Brentford. He's always going to get lauded for what he did at Brentford, even if they've gone through periods of struggle. Like he's always going to be net up with what he's done. Whereas at Tottenham, like I said, the lights do shine brighter and the pressure gets bigger. But I do think he is capable of making that next step up to a bigger club, whether it's Spurs or, like I said,
he's ready for it now. Like we've got a 5-year sample size of Thomas Frank at Brentford in the Premier League, and I just really feel like he's ready.
yeah.
I feel like probably all like Marco Silva, Thomas Frank, they're both ready for a step up in some sort of capacity, whether it's Tottenham or not. But yeah, I definitely have him top on my solid list. For me, I think he'd be out of the realistic choices probably my number one.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, and I think a lot with him, like we discussed on the podcast again yesterday, Ben. But like, time will tell with these managers. Like, all you can do is really give them an opportunity to like step up and see how they adapt to that level. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. No manager's worked out for us in the last 20 years, really. So, wouldn't exactly be anything new. So, I just feel like it'd be definitely worth a punt on somebody like a Thomas Frank for me.
I'd agree with that. Kish, who would you have as like your number one? Forgetting Inzaghi, is your number one kind of solid option out of all of the guys that we've got here?
I think it would be Hoeneß, to be honest.
Yeah.
Again, I need to watch more of him, but from everything I've read and seen, it's that kind of mold of manager who's still very principled but is adaptable. Yeah, but I think closely followed by Frank. I do like the idea of that personality who knows how to manage like the English media. Obviously, it'd be a step up in terms of that, but knows how to manage kind of the pressures of the Premier League, knows each team inside out, but also I think could platform some of our players to really kick on. And I think because we did the squad video earlier this week, it means like it really kind of convinced me our squad's nowhere near as bad as it is right now. If that makes sense. It's so much better than what it's shown.
When you see all of the players there just on that kind of grid, it's like, oh, actually, we're not that bad.
It's given them a new lease of life as well, because we're so used to judging these players under the microscope of Ange Postecoglou's system, and you take them out of that, and like Kish said, you give them a manager who will hopefully get the best out of them. Like, there are loads of good players in our squad, mate. Loads of good players who are easily European level, and lots of players with lots of room for development as well. And I think, that's one of the major selling points for all four of those in the solid category, I think. And to be honest, all of those in the solid category, I would definitely 100% get behind. And that's it for me.
Well, that's our list. I'm going to leave the link in the description to this as well, so you can do it yourselves. And again, send us kind of a screenshot of exactly what you want and the manager that you want and how you'd rank them. So thanks very much to Seb and for Kish for giving up your time coming on. I've really enjoyed this kind of discussion, the format that we've done.
Loved it, mate.
Really good stuff. So make sure to go and check out Lilywhite Lab stuff. Make sure to go and check out Seb stuff, TikTok, YouTube, and obviously our podcast that we do together as well, FC Bottle Jobs. So nice one, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.